Well, hello everybody, it's Tim Green with the Rattle Magazine. Welcome to another Critique of the Week. It's Friday, April 8th. Hope you're having a good one. As always, the point of the Critique of the Week is to give that workshop experience to everybody who can just sit around and enjoy it through a live stream. So as always, leave your comments, as many as you can. Say what you, in the chat windows, say what you like about the poem, what was working, what wasn't, all that good stuff. Let's see. So we got Dick Westheimer here. Hey, Dick. And Tom Barlow here. Cindy Gore, Kathy Gibbons, Terry R. Over on YouTube, over on Facebook. Let's see. Is anyone here yet on Facebook? Nate Jacobs here on Facebook. Hey, Nate. Let's give it a little bit of time for everybody to gather around before we start our poem. We have two good poets today, once again. Stephen Schwei and Ayesha Tirmzi. Sharon Fronte's here. Hello, Sharon. Okay. So, let's dive right in. Let's see what we've got. This is people you don't want to run into a gay bar. And again, this is Stephen Schwei, if I'm saying that right. People you don't want to run into at a gay bar. And maybe, let's see. I think this is a little too... Adjust the camera a little bit. That's a little better. Hang on, bear with me. I should have done this before the show. I didn't actually look at the... Let's see. Let's get a little more, maybe a little more the white balance. Get that look out of there. Get a little more there, and then a little more focus. Right about there. Okay. I think that fits a little better. Did I just... Maybe I didn't do anything. Let me... It's a little too bright. Turn this down. Come on. Maybe that's better. Like point, balance, sharpness. Okay. Okay, I think that's better. Okay. People you don't want to run into in a gay bar. Your father, your son, your ex-wife's new husband, your boss's 21-year-old son. Well, maybe. The androgynous woman who confuses your feelings. The man staring at you. Then you see a mirror right behind you. Anybody with bad breath. Your straight best friend you crushed on. Showing up in makeup, even if it's Halloween. The guy who has hit on you 50 times. The guy who bites too hard or bores you to death. The guy who you slept with once but can't remember his name. Anybody who will report back or post pictures without asking. The one you keep approaching but relentlessly rejects you. A stumbling drunk who likes you only when he is the guy you ditched in the bar down the street. The one who left you. A group of guys snickering. The valet off duty you didn't quite tip enough. Any man coughing and wheezing or shrill beyond reason. Somebody who latches on to you, their new best friend. Your nemesis. The last person you had an argument with. Somebody who reminds you of somebody who has died. People with a chip. Debbie Downers or long stories that never go anywhere. Somebody who never makes you laugh or repeats themselves every time you see them. The one who never remembers your name correctly. A guy you owe money to. Your sanctimonious sister. The guy you think represents all queers all wrong, too feminine, in leather, or wearing too little. The person who saw you make a fool of yourself. Your car mechanic in a banana hammock. The barback you mistook for your next conquest. And of course, quite possibly, me. So that's a good poem. I like that. This is people you don't want to run into in a gay bar. It's a good kind of list-style poem. And there are a few, I think there are a few small things I would change, but I think this poem mostly sort of fulfills itself and works pretty well. So people you don't want to, because there's a nice turn at the end, too. So we have this sense of motion, where something actually happened in the poem. You know what? I'm gonna do this. Hang on a second. Okay. So I try to get more light on the screen, and it makes it like, yeah, I think that was the problem. It was just annoying me too much. So now the light's not pointed at it. Okay, so what I was saying is that I think the poem, it has a kind of premise that with a sense of movement that works with this ending. So I think the sort of the structure of the poem works really well. And then there's a great sense of humor. And as Igor mentions, the humor is great and disarming. And yeah, I agree. There's several funny parts where I was, I had to try not to chuckle too much to read the poem because it was pretty funny. And so we have a nice setup to people you don't want to run into at a gay bar. So we know where we are and we can sort of get a sense of, we immediately know what's going on. And Kathy Gibbons says this poem grabbed me right away, and it did. Your father, your son, your ex-wife's new husband. There's a way that the list it starts out with short ones, which is a good way to use a list too. So it's grabbing your attention right away with these little tiny sentence fragments. Your boss's 21-year-old son. Well, maybe. Then there's the first joke. The androgynous woman who confuses your feelings. The man staring at you. Then you see a mirror right behind you. But there are a few things. This is the first one. I think the syntax is a little clunky here. There are a couple of these places. The man staring at you. It should be phrased a little better. The man staring at you, and then you see a mirror right behind you. So all the yous, I think that's what it is. It's the you, the you, the you. It gets a little bit too much with the you. And I think you can maybe just say it like the man staring at you before you notice the mirror behind him or something like that. There's some way you could phrase this so it's not the same exact structure where you're repeating this you every time. Anybody with bad breath, your straight best friend you crushed on, showing up in makeup, even if it's Halloween. And again, it's another bit of a joke. The guy who has hit on you 50 times, the guy who bites too hard or bores you to death, the guy you slept with once but can't remember his name. So we have a really nice list going on. And one of the things about if you're doing a list type poem, and really this is the case for most, for any poem. It's really important to vary the syntax and sentence length so we don't get sort of repetitive and this sort of feeling that you know what's coming. Because part of the joy of a poem is not knowing what's coming. And so there's always a way, and I always mention, I think the best person at working in different syntaxes and sort of shaping sentences so they're always surprising just in the way they move is Alan Shapiro. I just love Alan Shapiro. And I think that, that's a great example. But with a list poem, it sort of makes it stark. Like it makes it very obvious that you need to vary the length. So you have these sentence fragments, then you have longer ones, and the moving between the two, there's a pleasure in that. And so that's working really well. Kathy Gibbons says, isn't he or she seeing themselves in the mirror? And yeah, exactly. For this part, that's what it is. The man staring at you, then you see a mirror right behind you. There's a way that's phrased that's a little confusing, I think, and a little clunky. But that's what's happening. So someone's staring at you, and then you realize you're staring in the mirror, is what's happening. You're seeing yourself staring at yourself, and you don't realize it at first. And the way that's phrased just makes it a little awkward, a little confusing. So I think that could be phrased better. Anyway, the guy you slept with once but can't remember his name. Anybody who will report back or post pictures without asking. The one you kept approaching but relentlessly rejects you. A stumbling drunk who likes you only when he is. This one, I think this is a little... because you're using sentence fragments, this fragment, when you construct something like this, there's an ambiguity about what this is referring to. And it's when he is drunk. I'm pretty sure that's what it means. A stumbling drunk who only likes you when he is drunk. But because of the way it's set up and the way we use this kind of structure for sentences sometimes, a lot of times a construction like this will be referring to the sentence before. So for me, when I read this line, I got a little bit confused just for a second. The one who keeps approaching but relentlessly rejects you. I thought maybe it was he is rejecting you. Because that's something we kind of do. We sort of modify it with sentence fragments a lot. And so this is one of the things I would maybe actually say drunk and describe this a little bit differently. So that you don't have to, so that it's clear. The guy you ditched in the bar down the street, the one who left you, a group of guys snickering, the off-duty valet, or the valet off-duty you didn't quite recognize, or you didn't quite tip enough, sorry. Any man coughing and wheezing. Maybe this is another sense too. I think it feels fine, but I think maybe It just feels unnatural to have valet before off-duty to me, so maybe just switch those. It sounds better to say off-duty valet, right? Maybe not. Maybe that's just me, though. It might just be a quirk of my mind. Any man coughing and wheezing or shrill beyond reason. Anybody who latches onto you, their new best friend, your nemesis, the last person you had an argument with, somebody who reminds you of somebody who has died. So this is just the thing about a list. And one of the things about this kind of poem, you have to sort of have a sense of how long it remains interesting and how you can keep the list interesting. And I think that so one of the things I would look for is whether or not I'm getting bored with the list. And I don't really get bored with the list. And part of it is the humor that we already mentioned. And part of it is in the pacing of it. It works really well, and it doesn't go too long. It's a good length, so I think it's working. Somebody who never makes you laugh or repeats themselves every time you see them. The one who never remembers your name correctly. A guy who you owe money to. Your sanctimonious sister. Again, that's kind of funny. The guy, a lot of these are just a little funny. The guy you think represents queer all wrong, too feminine, too leather. I'd probably put like a dash there maybe, but that's a minor thing. In leather or wearing too little. The person who saw you make a fool of yourself. You're a car mechanic in a banana hammock. And again, this is sort of the biggest, most blatant joke in the poem. So it's good it comes right at the end because it sort of shifts the gears a little bit and sets you up for the punchline. The barback you mistook for your next conquest. And again, I think it's good to do this sort of biggest joke and then a flat one and then the sort of real punchline of the poem kind of. And of course, quite possibly me, which is the turn. All these people could be me. And I think I like the way the poem works. And I think this works as the last line really well. But I think it could be phrased a little better. I think this is one of the lines. There are like maybe 3 or 4 lines in the poem that I feel like could be phrased better. And actually, the last line is one of them. Because the idea is that any one of these people could be me. And I think, I don't know, there's a smoother way you could say that. The barback you mistook for your next conquest. And I don't know. Like you could just say, whichever one of these is me. There's a way you want to end with a me is the turn, because that's the big turn. And the thing is that I, the speaker, could be any one of these people for you, which is sort of the clever thing that the poem's doing. And I think this should be phrased a little better. Tom Barlow says, am I the only one who had to look up barback? I don't really know what that word means, but in context, I thought I did. Let me see if I maybe I should look up barback. Let's see. Because I thought, yeah, like it's like a busser. Yeah, that's what I thought. Like the who would bust the tables and clean up the bar and stuff. Yeah, I don't spend a lot of time. If you watch the critique of the week, or not the critique of the week, the Rattlecast, there's a poem about the 5 times I went to a bar, and it's literally true. I think I've been to a bar like 5 times. So I don't know what the barback is either, but just in context, that's what I assumed it meant. Let's see. Yeah, so Benjamin Barr says, or simply meet. So just read it like this. I feel like it's just too maybe self-aware of, it's just sort of too, I don't know, like the stumbling here, all the little and of course, quite possibly me is a little too on the nose or something, It's just a little too the poet being a poet, like a little too cute. And I think maybe it'd be I think it would be, or whichever one of these is me. I think I would leave it like that. But Benjamin Barr suggests just saying or me. So let's kind of read it like that. The person who saw me make a fool of myself, your mechanic in a banana hammock, the barback you mistook for your next conquest, or me. And I think maybe a little more than that. I just don't like all the and of course, quite possibly, but you need that sense of quite possibly, because you don't know. Part of it is that you don't know which, like the speaker doesn't know which one of these people I am for you, which is part of the thing with the poem, which is interesting. So it needs that sort of sense of quite possibly, but the hesitation to say it is kind of too much like a, too much of an act, if that makes sense. For me, that's my interpretation, or my sense of it as I was reading. I mean, and maybe me would be a really quick one, short one. Let's see. Kind of been ignoring Facebook. Dick Westheimer says, love the turn. Yeah, me too. I think it's great. Like, if the poem didn't go anywhere, and it just listed all these things and then ended, it wouldn't really work. But because the poem is really all about this or me. And that's really what the poem is. And the whole thing is a setup. I think, what is that? I was talking to somebody who called it, they call it a rope-a-dope? Is that what they call it? Or it's like the float like a butterfly, sting like a bee kind of thing, where the whole poem is like a setup for like the one line that's the punchline. And there's a style of poem they call it. I can't remember. I think they use that as the metaphor. But like the whole list poem thing that you're going through is really all the setup just to get to this turn. And I think it's really well done. So I think it's great. So Dick Westheimer says he just used the leave out the qualifier and just say, and of course me. And I think that, I think maybe that'd be good too. So whatever feels right. I think this, of course, quite possibly is too much. And that's sort of my sense. It's just too, I've already said it, but it's too much. And Steve S. says, that could be the author. Said it could be for a totally different reason. That's true too. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. So I'd play with that last line. I'm just not sure what. Hopefully we've explained what's a little off with it. Dick Westheimer says, I read the end differently. Tim, the me is the speaker imagining that others are looking askance at him. Yeah, that's what I mean. So maybe I didn't articulate it clearly, but that's what I mean, is that I am among these people. I could be one of this type of person for you. Maybe I didn't explain that right, but that's what I'm talking about. Let's see. Yeah, so I think this poem, I think it just works pretty well. Just a few line edits otherwise. But I think it works. I think it's a good poem. So let's move on to the next one. Maybe the next one has a little more we can say about it. I mean, the only thing here is just a couple lines that I would fix. Yeah. Okay, so Steve S. is the author, yeah. Yeah, a couple lines I would clean up, and then I'd just work on this last line. It just feels a little too self-conscious or too like the writer stands up and says, I'm writing a poem, and it's that kind of feeling. Whereas it needs to be a little more subtle, I think. So let's look at the other one. And this is, Stephen Schwei, and this is Murderous Crows. 6 murderous crows alight on a wire outside my door, ravenous in their capacity to do harm and cause mischief, formerly tame, now rampantly rabid. 6 friends ghosted me during the pandemic, blew me out of the sky. Not yet craven foes, just restless souls weeding their garden, pruning the hedges, wielding their weapon of silence and cutting me loose, inconsequential to them, expendable, superfluous. 1 blackbird fails to cling and drops head first. 2 sing songs to each other, slightly off key. Another pretends to be a dove. 2 others ache to be in love. They don't yield, expecting me to change my route, ducking for cover as I head for my house, avoiding their shadows. I assume they're plotting, conjuring a scheme. They assume I'm stalking and protecting their vacant nests. Shared wariness, timid acquiescence. The only moves we make are to avoid a confrontation. We grudgingly accept our truce in silence. So this is an interesting poem. There's some things I really like, and then some places I get bored. So Kathy Gibbons says, that third stanza is lovely. And actually, I like the second. I think I really get into the poem. I guess I like the beginning of the poem as a whole. So 6 murderous crows alight on a wire outside my door, ravenous in their capacity to do harm and cause mischief, formerly tame, now rampantly rabid. So here I get bored kind of here. I like the image to start off first. I get kind of bored with this the sort of generalizing that's going on here. The 6 murderous crows lighting outside my door is an interesting image to start with. We're starting with an image, and so we're painting a scene in our mind, and then we get to the sort of the ravenous and their capacity to do harm and cause mischief, formerly tame, now rampantly rabid. There's that ravenous, rampantly rabid. Like all those things kind of just build on and don't really add a whole lot. So this I would like condense down, but I love the transition here from having this little setup of the murderous crows to the 6 friends who ghosted me during the pandemic, and not knowing why there's a connection, but feeling that connection. I think it's a really cool turn. And then I love the second and third stanzas together. So 6 friends ghosted me during the pandemic, blew me out of the sky. Not yet craven foes, just restless souls, weeding their garden, pruding the hedges, wielding their weapon of silence. I think maybe I'd end this here. Again, this in cutting me loose, inconsequential to them, expendable, superfluous. This is the same sort of issue that I had at the first stanza, where it felt like it went on in an unnecessary way. It got kind of redundant. But then one blackbird fails to cling, so we have the friends, and we move back to the blackbird. One blackbird fails to cling and drops head first. 2 sing songs to each other slightly off key. Another pretends to be a dove. 2 others ache to be in love. So we go, there's a nice movement from the blackbirds to the friends, and we're kind of wondering how they relate, and what this metaphor is going to be, which is a kind of a tension that's drawing us forward through the poem. They don't yield, expecting me to change my route. I think the expecting me to change my route is kind of a clunkiness. So I would add that they're ducking for cover. I head for my house, avoiding their shadows. I assume they're plotting, conjuring a scheme. They assume I'm stalking and protecting their vacant nests. Shared weariness, timid acquiescence. So again, a lot of times we have these, modifying what we already know, or just repeating what we already know in sort of an abstract way, which doesn't really add much. And I think a lot of times we keep doing that in this poem. And then at the end, the only moves we make are to avoid confrontation. We grudgingly accept our truce in silence. And again, this must be the metaphor for the friends who ghosted me, like we're pretending we're still friends, even though we're not, and we're living with that silence. Let's see. So Terry R. says, I like the first 3 lines of the first 2 stanzas. Can we do with only these as we go into the third? Yeah, I think this poem, 2 things. I think it stretches out much longer than it needs to be. I would cut a whole bunch of this stuff. And then I'm not sure if it goes as far as it wants to at the end. I think, I don't know, it sort of set up this issue, the feeling of being ghosted and what that means. And it kind of took the easy, quick way out. The only moves we make are to avoid confrontation. We grudgingly accept our truce in silence. I feel like this poem wants to go deeper, and it just hasn't yet. So, man. Let me try to adjust this again. I think I'm gonna have to buy a new camera because this document camera. But we've been using it for 3 years. I think it's starting to go. Okay, it's a little better. Yeah. So this poem, I think what's really working in the poem are the concept of ghosting and the parallel with the murderous crows. But it feels like that part could only be like a half a page. And then I'm going to dig deeper into this concept of what does it really mean to ghost? Like why do we ghost people instead of like acknowledging what's going on? And how does that make you feel? I mean, I think there's more to it that we could explore. So I think this is like sort of, this poem is where the other one feels like a completely finished poem, just a couple little tiny edits. This one is still looking for that turn. You know, there was that great turn at the end with the very last word in the other poem. And this poem hasn't gotten there yet. It sort of has a good setup, and there's something that's like, you know, itching at us that we want to write and want to understand what's going on. But we haven't gotten there yet. So I would keep pushing this poem forward. Cindy Gore says, what if you start with the last stanza and leave out the bird references? So starting with the last stanza, how would that look? The only moves we make are to avoid confrontation. We grudgingly accept our truce in silence. And then keep on. I don't know. I think, let's see. Tom Barlow says the pun in the title, A Murder of Crows, does that work? Yeah, I wonder. I mean, there's just a lot. It feels like there's a lot more that this poem wants to say, and it's not mined yet. It's like a sort of we found a vein in the mountain, you know, and we know there's gold there. And we started digging and took out a chunk of it, but the whole vein is still there. And I want to extract that whole thing for this poem and get more into it. Let's see. Kathy Gibbons says maybe make this the first 3 lines the title and go right into the second stanza on. Yeah, so if the title was 6 murderous crows alight on a wire outside my door, 6 friends ghosted me during the pandemic. Yeah, that could work too. Let's see. I mean, what really works, I like the going back and forth between the crows and the friends. Because I feel like there's some kind of like deeper truth there. Like you can feel it. There's that like hum of something there. And I think we have to like keep working at it. Like, I think this poem is just very unfinished. Let's see. Josh Williams says perhaps he should lean into it, not going as far as we want and ghost us by the end. That's a great idea. However, he needs to be leading us there the entire time. That was Josh Williams. That was a great comment. I like that. And Nate Jacob says, the ending needs to be empty. Give us something that will stay with us, make us think. Yeah, that's the thing. Like it's a great setup, and it just didn't go far enough to leave us with something. Let's see. Insurance Friday says yes, the ending needs a bit of a punch somehow, and Jeff Littlejohn says purpose. Yeah, I agree. So this poem feels to me just like an incomplete poem. But I love the setup. I think it's really cool. And I love, again, this transition. I would save this, no matter what you do, because I love this. It's very unexpected to go from the 6 murderous crows to then 6 friends ghosting me. And that feels like the heart of it. But how is that murderous, you know? Like, what is that murdering? Those are the kind of things that we feel like we want to have explored. I do love that idea of ghosting us, though. You know, a poem about ghosting that ghosts us is kind of perfect. So if you could pull that off somehow, that would be really cool. And of course, we published that Jane Hirschfield poem that I mentioned several times, but you know, I'm sure Stephen Schwei probably hasn't. So it's so short. I'll just show it again. Jane ghosts us in this poem about ghosts. And it's just a good example of the way you can, you know, you can think outside the box in a poem too and do something different. And so this is those who cannot act. Oops. Let me see. First one I want to get. And then I want to do this. Oops. I want to do this. Here. So this is the Jane Hirschfield, Those Who Cannot Act. Those who cannot act will suffer into truth. What a skill is submitted. Those who cannot act will suffer too. The sister banished into exile. The unnamed dog soon killed. Even the bystanders vanish one by one, peripheral, in pain unnoticed well. And then it ghosts us because we vanish too. And that kind of concept I think could work really well in this poem. So maybe that's something to play with too. I really like that suggestion by Josh. So let's see. Let's move on to the next poet, I think, unless there's any more comments that I should share. Kathy Gibbons says, even an ellipsis at the end. Tom Barlow said, we should probably talk about this a little bit. He says, the pun in the title, "A Murder of Crows," does that work? And I think it doesn't work yet. I think that's the issue. But I think it might be. The heart of the poem was, why is this murder? And the way the poem's set up, I think it's a little too, like the ending was a little too on the nose. I think the title is a little too on the nose because it doesn't really give us what's going on. But it could. So maybe there's a better title too, depending on, where the poem ends up going. I don't know if I could say anything else other than that. Okay, let's go to the next poet then. But good stuff. Thanks for sharing these, Stephen. Okay. Oops, not this one. So the next poet is Ayesha Tirmzi, and this is "The Sad Heart of Ruth." The Sad Heart of Ruth. Cindy Gore says, I once saw a corny sign with just 2 crows painted in words, "attempted murder." That's funny. The Sad Heart of Ruth. And there's a footnote here to the title. And it says the title is quoting a line from the poem "Ode to a Nightingale" by Keats. The Sad Heart of Ruth. I saw a woman sitting on the bus reading a poetry book, when abruptly she looked up from the page to implore the view outside the window to give her something. Instead, the view raised its eyebrows. "Tell me, what behooves you?" She shook her head, pressing on the pages of her book. "I need a room with a view." How is the view like, you might ask? Probably the very sunny and windy type, where flowers of spring swarm the air like tulle. On the trees contrails people's laughter, and they pester your eyes ticklishly. Her eyes were shedding white petals, fallen and trodden on by the footsteps in the rain, because today was such a good day, because it had been a while since she had such a good day. I approached her with misplaced care. I know we're all asking questions here. I'm sorry to ask one more, but are you happy? She turned towards me, couldn't stop herself from giving a short laugh. It's not as simple as that. I think it's the small but certain things that help, the unwavering kind, like recalling his heart-shaped smile while lying down after a long day's work, or finding hazelnut cream in a croissant that was bought to not to let the cashier down, or this right here, crying on a bus while reading a poetry book. After all, how far could the ride last without poetry? But lately, wrists have been on my mind. It was when she persistently grasped my wrists with both her hands, as if to measure the life within their translucent jade roots, saying with barely restrained intimation, "I want to take her away." That night, I dreamt he faintly clasped my wrists, as if enveloping a lost voice in hidden gray. In hodden gray? To say he fully accepts all that is me and wants to protect it. I puzzled then. What is it about wrists? Am I something to be taken away or protected? She blinked, and her narration perished into powdered blanket flowers. I tried nodding along, but my smile waned. I diverted my gaze. I had to get off the bus. I decided to walk the rest of the way home. It began to drizzle, of course, as I covered my face in anguish. I had unwittingly glimpsed into her view and seen that her wrists were broken. But even in her state of shambles, she seemed all the more beautiful to me, with those wispy vermilion tendrils on her wrists, in an immaculate disarray. I looked back as the bus aged hum resounded away. It was a departure from a spot in time. I kept feeling the need to search for a forgotten ticket in my pocket, but I had no pockets to begin with. I looked above at the clustering clouds covering the primrose way. What immortal hand or eye could paint thy fearful symmetry? O light hiding behind these flamingo clouds. Interesting. So, The Sad Heart of Ruth is the poem here. And let's see. So I'm not really familiar. I don't know who is. I haven't read a whole bunch of Keats. Ode to a Nightingale. I've probably read it, but I don't really remember it. Jimmy Papa says the first mention of wrists made me think of suicide, and it did me too. It's The Sad Heart of Ruth. So let's see. So Potter O'Donoghue again says, could the poem have ended earlier? Is there a better poem nested within it? That's my sort of takeaway. Josh Williams says, if you're going to quote Keats, you better go hard. That's funny. Joe Barca says, I love the title. And the poem also references Blake, says Jenny Middleton. Laura Benjamin says, I would refer the writer to Patricia Hempel's short piece, Red Sky in the Morning, regarding experiencing in the moment and then looking back again. And also Jenny Middleton says, I agree, I think the poem is too long. And that was, so as I was reading the poem, I kind of, drifted a little bit. I kind of drifted a little bit myself, my attention. And it felt like it was going on too far. I saw a woman sitting on the bus reading a poetry book, and I assume it's, Keats. Reading a poetry book when abruptly she looked up from the page to implore the view outside the window to give her something. And so we have this capitalized view, which gives it a lot of prominence. Instead, the view raised its eyebrows. We're personifying the view. Tell me what behooves you. She shook her head, pressing on the pages of her book. I need a room with a view. Nate Jacobs puts it this way. The poem has interesting stuff, but it is over-narrated, and parts feel almost like a poorly executed translation. Attractive Face says, it begins really interesting, but for some reason the view raises its eyebrows. Through me, I can't visualize it, maybe using like as a metaphor. I drifted too, wasn't sure where it was going, but picked up the melancholy. Yeah, that's how I felt too. So I felt the feeling of it. Like I felt the emotion was conjured. And we were like primed for it with The Sad Heart of Ruth being the title. But I felt the sadness. But I also sort of lost, track. Jerry Seven says too long needs to be tightened up. Nate Jacobs says, trim this by at least half. And yeah, that's my sense of it too. He was like the view. And I agree with Attracted too, that the personifying the view was a little, it was hard to see and hard to sort of feel. Potter O'Donoghue says, some nice thoughts, but the word behooves gives me the heebie-jeebies. Joe Barca says, I like the repetitive use of wrists. Sharon Frente, yes, too long. I wrote many poems inspired by Keats, all short. And Kathy Gibbons points out Wet Petals is so great. So let's keep looking at this poem a little more, though. How was the view? Like, see, I'm not a big fan of maybe one of the things to cut is this personifying the view. I think it's a little too much. Where were we? Probably the very sunny and windy type, where flowers of spring. So instead the view raised eyebrows, tell me what behooves you. So I saw a woman. Let's kind of piece it together. Like, what could we cut? Because we're all feeling like it's too long. So what could be cut to make the poem get through it too quick, more quickly? I saw the woman sitting in the bus reading a poetry book. I like that. I'm right on board with the bus. When abruptly she looked up from the page to implore the view outside the window to give her something. I think we could just lowercase this and keep it just the view outside. And then maybe instead of the view talking, we could cut this part, and then she could just, as if she's talking to the view, but not actually say that, not like go that far. So she could just, she's looking outside, hoping there's a view. Like I'm imagining what she's doing as she looks out the window from her book. But then she shakes her head and goes back, She shook her head, pressing on the pages of her book. And maybe I don't know. So how was the view like? So I would get rid of the view stuff. Probably the very sunny and windy type, where flowers of spring swarm the air like tulle on the trees, contrails, people's laughter, and they pester your eyes ticklishly. Do you have a suggest cutting a third stanza? And I think you could cut that too. I think, or just maybe combine. I think I like the question of what view she might be looking for. I like the idea of like the person is looking up from the book, and then there's the view out the bus, and then what view would she be looking for? I like that idea. So maybe that's something we could play with a little more. But condensing it down a little, I think. Her eyes were shedding wet petals, fallen and trodden on by footsteps in the rain, because today was such a good day, because it had been a while since she had a good day. So we're still projecting and imagining what the woman on the bus is going to do, or what she's saying. And you see, somebody, and you can imagine what they might be going through, and that's not I don't know. I think that's a good place for the poem to go. I think that works. So I think seeing the woman on the bus and then imagining what she's going through, and trying to sort of just project and see what's in her mind just based on her movements as she's reading this book. I think that's a good concept for the poem. I think that works. I approach her with misplaced care. I know we're all asking questions here. I'm sorry to ask one more, but are you happy? She turns toward me, couldn't stop herself from giving a short laugh. This is a strange, very forward thing to ask somebody. Very unusual. And that part I'm kind of curious. I become curious because, like, how is somebody going to react to a question like that, which is not something we usually do to strangers on the bus, right? She turned towards me, couldn't stop herself from giving a short laugh. It's not as simple as that. I think it's the small but certain things that help, the unwavering kind, like recalling his heart-shaped smile while lying down after a long day's work. Or finding hazelnut cream in a croissant that was bought to not let the cashier down. I trip over this every time, so fix that syntax up. Or this right here, crying on a bus while reading a poetry book. After all, how far could the ride last without poetry? And let me show you, another poem popped up into mind. Let me show you another poem. This is, I have to remember who, oh yeah. Yeah, so this is a similar kind of situation. And you see how in this poem here, hang on. Yeah, this is Telemarketer by Brett Garcia Myron. And it's a similar kind of thing where we have an unexpected conversation. And this is from way back, before I was even at Rattle. This isn't the best of Rattle, from the early days, because it was one of the most popular poems. This is actually the first poem that I was aware of that went kind of viral on Rattle. This is Brett Garcia Myron's Telemarketer. I'm reading on the couch when she calls, asks for me by name. I smile at our scripted intimacy, imagine her cubicle with photos of pets, the long bend of light on her lacquered nails. Listen to this, I reply. David kissed the soft inner banks of women's thighs. Pardon? Oh, there's more, I say. Thighs like loamy earth that cup the rivers or lilies blooming and rose and mint. Is this a bad time for you, sir? Is it for you? Tell me something, I insist. Tell me anything. A quiet unfolds between us as though we'd spent our breath on withering arguments or lost it in the scented air of sweat. Finally, she says, I'm in Lincoln, Nebraska. Outside leaves are turning in the cold. So feel how that is a strange conversation to have. Reading the book, a little offensive maybe. But feel how it feels like it's something that could really happen, even though it's strange. Like, you can imagine this is just a story, and it might be just a story of something that actually happened. He was reading this book, and so he read, a telemarketer interrupted his reading, and so he, instead of hanging up on them immediately, read the lines he was on in the book. And then her reaction, and then this sort of loneliness that is captured in this moment where we sort of have a scripted interaction that becomes real. So this poem reminds me of that, because it's a stranger, an encounter with a stranger on a bus, and that's the way you could shrink it up and just sort of tell the story of the interaction, I guess is what I'm getting to, is that the most engaging part is the idea of this person actually here. And I like the title too, so, how that sets it up as well. Imagining her, she could be Ruth, she could be reading Keats on the bus, and we have this interaction where there's a place in which this kind of like sort of honest, deeper interaction doesn't really exist. But then we sort of force it to happen with this question here. And I think if we told the poem sort of more straight like that, with less narration and more just like, this is what happened, I think that might work better and might be the way to condense it, if that makes sense. Because I think that I saw a woman sitting in the bus reading a poetry book, and then she looks out the window, and like, what is she looking for? Like, that's a very good question. It raises a lot of tension and questions in the poem. But then we could just tell the scene and how it plays out without as much like narration interrupting. Like, just tell it more straight, tell it more directly. Like, she was looking out the window. What might she be looking at? Like, imagine what she might be looking at. And then I said this to break up the scene, and then how she replied. Because this is such a great, surprising line too. We haven't gotten down there reading enough, but, or this right here, crying on a bus while reading a poetry book. After all, how far could the ride last without poetry? I love that line. That's great. And then this, but lately wrists have been on my mind. And that's great too. So that's a surprising thing to say. It conjures up a lot of things, as Peter mentioned. Let's see. It was when she persistently grasped my wrists with both her hands, as if to measure the life within their translucent jade roots, saying with barely restrained intimation, I want to take her away. Now, who's saying this? It's one of the things I got a little confused with, because I thought italicized lines were part of the conversation, but then it feels like part of the narrator is saying this here, so I get a little confused about that. For this section. But then it feels like, so I want to take her away? I don't know, I'm a little lost with why this is italicized. Because I thought and just the context of the poem makes it seem like this is description of what's going on the bus. But this is like the thoughts in the speaker's mind as that's happening. But not speech from the woman who was sitting there. That night I dreamt he faintly clasped my wrists as if enveloping a lost voice in hodden gray. Is that a typo or is that a word I don't know? Hodden. Oh, it's a coarse kind of cloth made of undyed wool, unformerly much worn by the peasantry of Scotland. That's interesting. So that's a word I didn't know. Hodden gray. To say he fully accepts all that is me and wants to protect it. I puzzled then. What is it about wrists? Am I something to be taken away or protected? So I guess, I guess this is all the woman speaking, as the italicized would suggest. But it feels like way too long, way longer than we actually speak and have a conversation. So I kind of get lost in the dialogue. I like it. I love it when she says short, strange things. So when people say short, strange things, it feels authentic and is interesting at the same time. So I love after all, how far could a ride last without poetry? Great insight, great line. I like that. And then the wrists are such a surprising, strange thing. But can we cut through? Maybe even just cut this and go right to that night I dreamt he faintly clasped my wrists. Because we don't know what that night is, but if she's so lost in the moment, it would make sense that she would just start telling the story. He faintly clasped my wrists as if enveloping a lost voice in hodden gray to say he fully accepts all that is me and wants to protect it. And I like the way, too, that this, even though it's not a natural sort of register, it's a very poetic way of speaking. The strangeness of it and the fact that she's reading Keats at the same time kind of all fits together, even though it makes it slightly surreal, but I think that works. I puzzled then, what is it about wrists? Am I to be taken away or protected? She blinked and her narration perished into powdered blanket flowers. I think that like stuff like this is sort of unnecessary. And I would drop it as part of the condensing the poem. I tried nodding along, but my smile waned. I diverted my gaze. I had to get off the bus. I decided to walk the rest of the way home. And this is a surprising thing, too. Like, what she said was so moving or upsetting even to the speaker of the poem that she had to get off the bus. So that's an interesting turn there, too. It began to drizzle, of course, as I covered my face in anguish. I like that. I mean, that's a sort of a melodramatic line, but I like it. I think it really works. I had unwittingly glimpsed into her view and seen that her wrists were broken. See, I think this is like telling us what you want to show us. Like, I think this kind of line, I had unwittingly glimpsed her into her view and seen that her wrists were broken. This is what you want us to understand without having to tell us. This is the show don't tell kind of thing. So we want to sort of wonder why the speaker was so upset they had to get off the bus. And then that's the reason, but we want to sort of come to that conclusion ourselves and not have to be told it. But even in her state of shambles, she seemed all the more beautiful to me, with these wispy vermilion tendrils on her wrists and an immaculate disarray. I like this description here. I think that works, and maybe that could be the ending. I looked back as the bus-aged sound resounded away. It was a departure from a spot in time. I kept feeling the need to search for a forgotten ticket in my pocket, but I had no pockets to begin with. I like these lines too. I'm not sure how they fit. I look above the clustering clouds covering the primrose way. What a mortal hand or eye could paint thy fearful symmetry, O light hiding behind these flamingo clouds. And again, there's footnote here. The second and third line of the stanza are echoing refrain from the poem "The Tiger" by William Blake. And I don't think you need that. I think just as far as the footnotes go, for this maybe you could italicize that to let us know that it's from something else if it's a direct quote. Or you could just let the illusion be an illusion. I don't think the footnote's necessary, I would say. But I think the ending is like higher up somewhere. I think it's sort of too, once we get to this point, we're explaining what the poem means rather than letting the poem itself find its own meaning. And so I think maybe the end is somewhere like here or here maybe. Let's see. Okay, so I've been talking. It's a longer poem, so I've been talking a lot. Jenny Middleton says if she's really reading, then those words are her view. I think there's a conflict in the narrative tracked by trying to include too many literary references. Yeah, Potter O'Donoghue says buses equal people equal poetry. Jenny Middleton says poems on the underground. Glad some are still around. Nate Jacob, this is magical and dreamy and wistful in parts, but the story in between those lines draws me out of the scene. The view, I suppose. The view and the wrists and the poetry, all great potential entry points, just cut some of the action out and tie the images together more efficiently. Yeah, good summary. Yeah, that's exactly what I would be working on. Jeff Littlejohn points out Keats referred to a biblical Ruth, sad for a husband's death, crying in a field, homesick. Potter O'Donoghue again says the poem could have ended at the first mention of wrists to leave us thinking probably about suicide. Yeah, that could be one ending too. I think it depends where. There's a lot of potential endings here. I think the poem, I think someone mentioned that earlier, and I think that was right, that there are a lot of potential endings, and then the poem pushes on past them. Let's see. And Dick Westover said the same thing. If there's a way to end the poem at the first repetition of wrist, that was arresting. I agree. Kathy Gibbons suggests, I think for the title, The View, The Wrist, The Bus. That'd be a better title. Or maybe not. I mean, I like the title too. Jimmy Papa says, tighten the language. Instead of I kept feeling the need to search, just say I searched. And yeah, so the whole thing is a lot of narrator, which we've been talking about. And that's one of the ways you cut out that kind of thing. So, things like abruptly, if it happens in the text abruptly, we don't need to say abruptly, things like that. There are a lot of things you can cut in that way that they're sort of the narrator imposing themselves upon things. Let's see. And Stephen S., the poem feels dreamlike in ways. It does. It's because it's so strange too, that conversation. And that's very interesting. Let's see. Jandre Van Breda says it could have ended at time too. Where was time? I think that might. There are a lot of places it could have ended. Where was that? I'm not seeing it right now, but yeah. Oh, we got to move on. Let's move on to the other poem too. They're longer ones, so it takes more time to get through them. But let's see. The end of my year letter. My same age friend. I want to be closer to that state of being, where we were both walking with feverish longing towards the same path. But I am so lost now. I can no longer see what reflection is at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs in this embalmed darkness, but I can but guess. My cascading questions, views, their apparent contradictions hound me, like the apparition of your face in the frozen lake instead of my own. I wish I could eye things for what they really were, but here I am, fixated on finding meaning in pain. Once I saw you give away a part of your affection, then hide yourself behind shaking hands. It reminded me of the gravity held between your pauses, how your entire being, your pained face, was bowed down by the ruthlessness of the lake that the world had thrown beneath your eyes. These days I wake up bereft and walk outside the smoggy mornings with leaden gait, thinking of your words once more. Where is the point in them? After all, we have both established in our own self-pity the futility behind words and the Sisyphean cause in marrying our lives to them. There's another page. Still, like those spooming cliches, I endeavor to see the selfsame tufts of seashell clouds swirling in the glowing sunrise, to remind myself of the hand that paints the skies. Up there, at times I see your sobbing face as you gulp down the cold crowds of rattling winds, warbling about the scraggly thorns in our night sceneries. Some days I lie to myself and retreat back to my shelves of tatty books to seek refuge in those same escapable words that I had once denounced. The dried-up papers crackle at me as I trace through the etymology of words like pain, affection, and self-pity, to see how their branches intertwine with mine. The silence replies with its surly smile that nothing truly had any meaning. Didn't you know? Life is waiting for me to give her value, but I hide myself behind shaking hands from her formidable gaze because I'm too afraid. Other days I return to the lake to gaze into its marbling waters and find solace in their slow, magnetic movements. So this is interesting. The same kind of things happening in this poem too, where there's so much to love. There's a dreamy quality, and there's some great lines and a great sense of flow and rhythm, and the music of speech is really, really strong in a lot of these, in a lot of this poem. But there's at the same time there's a lot of like narration and sort of excess clutter, and a lot of Powder Denner says too long again, some lovely poetry caged within. Exactly. Gentleman says I like the second poem much more. Josh Williams says too many adjectives. Um, and yeah, that's the thing. It's sort of there's sort of too much narration, and so there's just a lot we can cut. And so I want to be closer to that state of being. We were both walking with a feverish longing towards the same path. So if you just cut this, I didn't mean to cut that. So if we just started, we were both walking with feverish longing toward the same path. That's the kind of thing. And not having, I want to be closer to the state of being. Like, that doesn't really add anything. It's sort of like just talking around the interesting poetry. But I'm so lost now. I can no longer see what reflection is at my feet. But I'm so lost now. You don't need to say that, I can no longer see. And this is my same age friend as well, because the poem is my end of the year letter, and so I'm not sure. Maybe this should be the title. My end of the year letter to my same age friend. But then we could just jump in. We were both walking with a feverish longing toward the same path. I could no longer see what reflection is at my feet, or what soft incense hangs upon the boughs. See, I love that. What soft incense hangs upon the boughs in this embalmed darkness. But the stuff like "but I can guess," like all that narrator, it sort of waters the poem down. Jamie Papa says, "I'd like to avoid adverbs like you are doing, Tim. There are a few more here that could be easily cut." Exactly, like it just feels the poetry is watered down by all the talking around the poetry and adverbs and adjectives. There's a way that the more direct we use language, the stronger and more like diamond it becomes. My cascading questions, views, their apparent contradictions hound me, like the apparition of your face in the frozen lake. Instead of my own. I'm not sure about the instead of my own. I wish I could eye things for what they really were, but here I am fixated on finding meaning in pain. So I don't know. I mean, this is more that like show don't tell kind of thing, where we're explaining the poem rather than letting us feel it. And so there's more to cut. Like I love lines like this. There's a real elegance to some of this stuff too. But you sort of have to trust it more. Once I saw you give away a part of your affection, then hide yourself behind shaking hands. It reminded me of the gravity held between your pauses. I like that detail. I think this is a good detail there. How your entire being, your pained face, was bowed down by the ruthlessness of the lake that the world had thrown beneath your eyes. Again, those great lines. These days I wake up bereft and walk outside to smoggy mornings with a leaden gait, thinking of your words once more. So again, this like thinking of your words once more. I mean, things like that are just I mean, if you just look at like film, like cinema, if you have to have the narrator is a lot of times intrusive and really takes away from our sense of the good storytelling of the script. And that's the kind of what goes on in these poems. There's so much narrator. And I think pulling back and letting the story tell itself is what we should be focusing on. Where is the point in them? After all, we have both established in our own self-pity the futility behind words and the Sisyphean cause in marrying our lives to them. So this poem, like, how could you get this poem into a sonnet length? How could this just be 14 lines? I think that's the way to try to be thinking of this, because there are 14 great lines here that tell a story. And it doesn't have to be a sonnet. It doesn't have to be that length exactly, but that kind of like condension is what's missing. Let's see. Still like those spuming cliches, I endeavor to see the self-same tufts of seashell clouds. See, stuff like this is just really fun just to read. Still like those spuming cliches, I endeavor to see the self-same tufts of seashell clouds swirling in the glowing sunrise. I mean, what a fun line that is. And the music of that, the cadence is great. To remind myself of the hand that paints the skies. Again, I love that. These lines are great. Like lines like that are just wonderful. Up there at times I see your sobbing face as you gulp down the cold crowds of rattling winds warbling about the scraggly thorns in our night sceneries. Again, that's really good too. So I don't know what to say, but except repeating the same things. Just condense it down to this stuff that's working really well, and let that tell the story rather than around, what's around it. Some days I lie to myself and retreat back to my shelves of tatty books to seek refuge in those same escapable words I'd once denounced. Again, we get back to a very chatty voice. The dried up papers crackle at me as I trace through the etymology of words like pain, affection, self-pity to see how their branches intertwine with mine. The silence replies with its surly smile that nothing truly had any meaning. Did you know? Life is waiting for me to give her value, but I hide myself behind shaking hands from her formidable gaze because I am afraid too. So here again, I'm this whole section, have trouble paying attention because I'm not as interested in this as I was in the other things. Other days I return to the lake to gaze into its marbling waters and find solace in their slow magnetic movements. I love thinking of the marbling waters and their slow magnetic movements. There's great descriptions. Let's see. Yeah, so Sharon Fronte says brevity. Nate Jacobs says the final stanza was good. Let that stanza be the guide to how the rest of the poem could be better written. Yeah, I agree too. So this is the kind of idea. Like we get we get a little bit of sense of who's speaking, but it's how much more condensed that storytelling is right there. Is what we want to say. And everybody's just talking about the brevity. Charlotte O'Hare says both poems are like dreamy clouds, a Monet sunset on Bollywood film set. If the meanings could be excavated more fully, like Tim said, you'd the diamonds that are in here drifting. Nate Jacobs says, I really do feel these poems, but a close reading renders it difficult to follow, hard to even continue, but the feeling conveyed is powerful enough to shine through the excess narration and over-explanation. Sharon Fronte, these are some great lines. This could be condensed into a really good poem. Cut. So I mean, I've here just in this, just by drawing little lines with checks, I've checked the really good stuff. And I think that could be just pieced together into a poem, of a half a page length or less, that would really work. So it's just all about condense. And I understand, I mean, this poem is written as like an epistolary. It's a letter sort of form. But it still feels much better, like it would be better condensed. Josh Williams says, try to be aware of ending lines with the same part of speech every time, like nouns, vary them along with the construction of the lines themselves. Yeah, that's not something I noticed, but that is a good piece of advice generally. And they do sort of have, each line has a very strong ending without a lot of play with enjambment. And because the lines vary in length, it sort of allows you to do that, which does get a little repetitive. That's one of the things about having sort of a consistent line length, is it sort of forces you to be a little bit, there's that delight in chaos kind of concept, and it forces you to sort of mix things up a little bit more. When you can end a line anywhere, and there can be lines this short or this long, it ends up sort of, there's an interesting way it becomes a little bit repetitive. Let's see. Okay. Well, I think that's all we have for this week. So, I'm gone 10 minutes over time, but that is okay. Thanks again for sharing these. It was Ayesha Tirmzi with these two poems, My End of the Year Letter, and what was the other one? Oh, The Sad Heart of Ruth, of course. And both of these are there's great, beautiful lines, and just a matter of finding a way to condense them. Then we also had People You Don't Want to Run Into in a Gay Bar, which is really close, just a few tiny polishes, I would say. And then the Murder of Crows feels more like, to me, like a draft that wants to go farther. But great poems all around. Thanks for sharing these, everybody. It's been a lot of fun. As it always is. I love doing the critique of the week. It's really fun. And let's see. Next week's guest on the Rattlecast is going to be, I guess this week I should say, Todd Davis. And that's Sunday, April 10th, the regular time, 9 p.m. Pacific, noon Eastern time. Todd Davis' book is Coffin Honey, which I still haven't had a chance to read, but will be reading tomorrow night. And I just love that cover. And Todd Davis, I've been looking back at his old poems, and there's some wonderful poems we've published of his too. He's the author of a whole bunch of books, and his newest is this Coffin Honey, poems by Todd Davis. And the prompt for this week was what was the prompt? I have to go look it up. The prompt was something about a dirt road. A woman walking on a dirt road? Was that it? Let's see. A woman walks down a dirt road late at night. Late at night was what I forgot. So a woman walks down a dirt road late at night was the prompt for this week. And the guest this week is Todd Davis with Coffin Honey, his newest book. We'll be talking to him. We'll be talking to the Poets Respond Poets of the Weekend, of course, too. And it's going to be a lot of fun like it always is. So hope to see you there. Rattlecast number 139, Sunday, April 10th, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. In the meantime, have a great weekend, and I will talk to you later. Goodbye.